A politician's support increases from 30% to 56%. Determine the absolute change and relative change in this situation. This problem highlights the difference between what we refer to as the absolute change and the relative change. Let's start with the absolute change. The absolute change in two quantities is simply the difference or the absolute difference between the two numbers. So let me write that down. So the absolute change between two numbers is simply the difference between them, but the absolute value. So whether they increase or decrease doesn't really matter when you're talking about an absolute change. It's the difference between the two numbers. I can think of it in terms of taking the ending amount or the ending quantity and then subtracting from it the starting quantity or the original quantity, and then taking the absolute value of the difference between those two numbers. For our problem, we're looking for the absolute change between 30% and 56%. So if I take my ending quantity, which is 56%, and I subtract from it the original or starting quantity, which is 30%, and take the absolute value of that difference, that tells me that 56% minus 30% is just 26%, and the absolute value of 26% is just 26%. In other words, I would say that the absolute change in the politician's support is 26%. That was simple enough. Now let's talk about the relative change. Relative change is not just the absolute difference, but the relative change talks about how one number changes in relationship to the other. It's actually a percentage. So the way we calculate relative change is the same way that we can think about I'm getting tongue-tied, is the same way we think about a percent increase or a percent decrease. A relative change is just another name for percent increase or percent decrease. That is, the relative change is the absolute change. How does your quantity change absolutely? But then you're going to divide that absolute change by your starting amount or your starting quantity. If you like, the new quantity minus the old quantity divided by the old quantity. Same idea as like with percent increase or decrease. So we're going to take our end quantity minus our starting quantity, that absolute change, and then we're going to divide by our starting quantity. For our specific problem, the relative change of 30% to 56% is 56% minus 30%, the absolute value of that, or the absolute value of 56 minus 30%, which is the absolute value of 26%, divided by the starting quantity. What did we start with? So in relationship to what we started with, which is 30%. So we're going to take the absolute value of 26%, or just 26%, divided by 30%. And what can we do here? This is a simple division. 26% is 0.26, right? This is one way to think of it, right? And 30% is 0.30. And if we take 0.26 divided by 0.30, that gives us our relative change. Or in other words, that gives us 0.86666 if we pull out our calculator repeating. Or 86.666%. And I always like to round to the nearest 2 decimal places unless I'm specified to do it otherwise. And so I'm going to write that as 86.67%. This is the relative change. How does 56% compare to 30%? So absolute change is the absolute difference between the two numbers. Relative change takes that absolute change but divides it by the starting quantity. The answer on the relative change will always be a percent, no matter what numbers you start with. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Good luck.